The morning sun was just beginning to peek through the city buildings when Maya Chen stepped off the bus. Clutching her worn music folder against her chest, her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Today was the day she had been dreaming about for months. The Steinway Youth Competition was happening in just 2 hours. She was finally here. Maya looked up at the massive concert hall in front of her. The building seemed to stretch up to the clouds with its fancy glass windows and marble columns. She had only seen pictures of this place online, and being here in person made her feel very small. Rich-looking cars were dropping off other contestants at the front entrance. She watched as teenagers her age stepped out wearing expensive suits and carrying professional instrument cases that probably cost more than her family's rent. She touched the small cross necklace her grandmother had given her for luck. Her fingers were already a little shaky, and she hadn't even gone inside yet. Maya had been playing piano since she was 7 years old, but not in the way these other kids probably learned. She didn't have a fancy teacher or go to a special music school. Instead, she learned by watching YouTube videos on her phone and practicing on an old keyboard her mother bought from a garage sale. The keyboard was missing a few keys, and some of the ones that worked made weird sounds. But Maya didn't care. Every day after school, she would rush home and practice for hours. Her little brother would complain about the noise. Her mother would sometimes ask her to turn it down because the neighbors were complaining. But Maya kept playing because music was the only thing that made her feel like she could be something special. Walking toward the entrance, Maya noticed how different she looked from everyone else. Her dress was simple and black, something her mother had bought from a discount store. Her shoes were clean but old, and her music folder was held together with tape in a few places. The other contestants looked like they had stepped out of a magazine. Their instruments gleamed in the sunlight, and they walked with the kind of confidence that comes from years of expensive lessons in private schools inside the building. Maya felt even more out of place. The lobby was huge, with a ceiling so high it made her neck hurt to look up. Beautiful paintings hung on the walls, and the floor was so shiny she could see her reflection in it. People were talking in small groups, and she could hear conversations about things she didn't understand. They talked about their private teachers, their summer music camps, and competitions they had won in other countries. Maya found a quiet corner and opened her folder to look at her sheet music one more time. The pages were worn from being handled so much, and she had written little notes in the margins to remind herself of the tricky parts. She had chosen to play Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, one of the most beautiful but difficult pieces ever written. She had spent 6 months learning it, playing it over and over until her fingers could move through the notes even when she was half asleep. Her mother had wanted to come with her today, but she couldn't take time off work. Money was always tight in their family, and missing even one day of work meant they might not have enough for groceries that week. So Maya was here alone, carrying not just her dreams, but the hopes of her whole family. Her mother had worked extra hours for months to save up the money for Maya's competition. Entry fee and bus fare to get here. The registration table was set up near the entrance, with several important-looking people sitting behind it. Maya got in line behind the other contestants, listening to them chat easily with the staff. They seemed to know each other, like they had been to these kinds of events many times before. Some of them were even talking about competitions they had competed in together in other cities. When it was finally Maya's turn, she walked up to the table with her paperwork ready. The woman behind the table looked up at her with a polite but distant smile. Maya handed over her application and tried to speak clearly, even though her voice was shaking a little. "Hello, I'm here for the competition today, Maya Chen." The woman looked through the papers quickly, her expression changing as she read. Maya watched her eyes move across the page, taking in details about Maya's background. Public school, no private music teacher, no previous competition experience. Self-taught through online resources. "One moment, please," the woman said, and Maya's heart sank. She could tell something was wrong by the way the woman's smile had faded. The woman walked over to a tall man in an expensive suit who was standing nearby. Maya couldn't hear what they were saying, but she could see them looking at her paperwork and then glancing over at her. The man shook his head several times, and Maya felt her stomach drop. The man walked over to Maya with her application in his hand. He was older, probably in his 50s, with gray hair and a stern expression. His suit looked like it cost more than Maya's family spent on clothes in a whole year. Small name tag on his jacket read Director Harrison Blackwell. "Miss Chen," he said, looking at her over his glasses. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding." Maya's heart started racing. "What do you mean?" "This competition is for serious musicians with proper training and background. I see here that you're from Roosevelt Public High School and you've listed your musical training as self-taught through online resources." He said the last part like it was something dirty. "But I can play," Maya said, her voice getting smaller. "I've been practicing for months. I know the piece really well." Director Blackwell looked at her like she had just said something silly. "Young lady, this is not a talent show. This is a prestigious competition for students who have dedicated their lives to serious musical study. We have contestants here who have been training at conservatories since they were children. They have teachers who have performed with major orchestras around the world." Maya felt her cheeks getting hot. But the application didn't say anything about having to go to a special school or having expensive teachers. "It's implied," he said coldly. "Anyone serious about music would understand that. I'm sorry, but I cannot allow you to waste the judge's time or embarrass yourself. This competition is for those who have real musical education, not for students who think watching videos on the internet is the same as proper training." The words hit Maya like a punch to the stomach. She looked around and noticed that some of the other contestants and their parents had stopped talking and were watching the conversation. She felt exposed and ashamed, like everyone could see that she didn't belong here.
"Please,"
Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I traveled here from across the city. I saved up money for months just to enter. Can't I at least try?" Director Blackwell's expression didn't change. "The answer is no. I suggest you use this as a learning experience. If you're truly serious about music, invest in proper lessons and training. Come back in a few years when you have the appropriate background." He handed her application back to her and walked away, leaving Maya standing there holding her rejected paperwork. She felt like crying, but she didn't want to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing her break down. The woman at the registration table gave her a sympathetic look, but didn't say anything. Maya walked away from the table, her legs feeling shaky. She found an empty chair in the corner of the lobby and sat down, staring at her application. Those months of practice, all those dreams, all that hope, it was over before it had even begun. She thought about going home, about facing her mother and having to explain that she never even got the chance to play. But as she sat there, listening to the sounds of the other contestants warming up in the practice rooms, something inside her started to change. The sadness was still there, but it was mixing with something else: anger, determination, a stubborn refusal to let one person's opinion define what she could or couldn't do. Maya looked up at the beautiful concert hall around her and made a decision. She wasn't going home, not yet. Maya sat in that corner chair for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Around her, the fancy lobby buzzed with activity. Parents were adjusting their children's clothes, making sure every hair was in place. Contestants were doing warm-up exercises with their fingers, some of them humming quietly to themselves. The sound of conversation filled the air, mixed with nervous laughter and the occasional sound of someone practicing scales on their phone app. She watched it all like she was looking through a window at a world she could never be part of. Every few minutes, someone would walk past her carrying an instrument case that looked like it cost more than her family's car. These weren't just music students. They were like young professionals who had been groomed for this moment their entire lives. A group of 3 girls walked by, and Maya couldn't help but listen to their conversation. They were talking about their summer at some music camp in Europe, comparing notes about their teachers and laughing about inside jokes Maya couldn't understand. One of them mentioned how her parents had flown in from California just to watch her perform today. Another talked about the new piano her father had bought her, a baby grand that took up half their music room at home. Maya looked down at her hands. These were the same hands that had learned to play on a broken keyboard, the same fingers that had taught themselves one of the hardest pieces in classical music. But apparently that didn't matter here. What mattered was where you came from, how much money your parents had, and whether you had the right kind of teachers. The more she sat there, the more frustrated she became. Not just sad anymore, but genuinely angry. She thought about all those nights she had stayed up late practicing, using headphones so she wouldn't wake up her little brother. She remembered how her fingers used to hurt from playing on the stiff keys of her old keyboard, and how she had to imagine what the missing keys would sound like. She thought about her mother, who had worked double shifts at the diner to save. Up the money for today. A loud announcement echoed through the lobby. Ladies and gentlemen, the competition will begin in 30 minutes. Contestants, please check in with your assigned practice rooms for final preparation. Maya watched as everyone started moving with purpose. Parents hugged their children and whispered encouraging words. Contestants gathered their sheet music and headed toward a hallway marked practice rooms. The energy in the room shifted from nervous chatting to focused determination, but Maya just sat there. She wasn't going anywhere because she had nowhere to go. She wasn't a contestant anymore. She was just a girl who had made a foolish mistake thinking she belonged in a place like this. As the lobby started to empty out, Maya noticed something she hadn't seen before. There was another hallway on the opposite side of the room, and she could see double doors that were slightly open. Curious, she got up and walked over to peek inside. It was the main auditorium, and it was absolutely breathtaking. Rows and rows of red velvet seats stretched out in perfect lines, all facing a stage that looked bigger than her entire apartment. The ceiling was decorated with beautiful paintings, and huge chandeliers hung down like sparkling jewelry. Stage sat a magnificent black piano that seemed to glow under the stage lights. Maya had never seen anything so beautiful in her life. She had imagined what this moment would feel like, walking onto that stage, sitting at that piano, feeling the weight of the audience's attention. Now she was seeing it, but as an outsider looking in, she slipped inside and found a seat in the very back row. If she couldn't perform, at least she could watch and learn. Maybe she could see what these other students did that made them so special. Maybe she could understand what she was missing. More people started filing into the auditorium. Dressed in expensive clothes, music teachers, and what looked like important people from the music world. They all seemed to know each other, greeting with air kisses and talking about mutual friends. Maya felt invisible in her back row seat, which was exactly how she wanted it. The first contestant was announced. A boy named Alexander from some prestigious music academy. He walked onto the stage like he owned it, sat at the piano, and began. To play, his technique was flawless, every note perfectly placed and timed. The audience listened politely, applauding at the appropriate moments. But something was missing. Maya couldn't put her finger on it at first, but as she listened to contestant after contestant, she started to understand. They were all technically perfect, but they sounded almost like robots. Beautiful, talented robots, but robots nonetheless. It was like they had memorized not just the notes, but also exactly how they were supposed to feel about the music. The third contestant played the same piece. Maya had been practicing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Maya knew every note of this piece, had felt every emotion it was supposed to convey. But listening to this performance, she felt like she was hearing it for the first time, and not in a good way. The student hit every note correctly, followed every dynamic marking on the sheet music. But it felt cold and distant. Maya found herself thinking about how she played that same piece. She reached the part where the melody soars and then crashes down like a wave. Always felt like her heart was breaking and healing at the same time. When she played the gentle middle section, she thought about her grandmother's hands teaching her to knead bread, gentle but strong. This wasn't in any textbook or online tutorial. It was just how the music made her feel. As more contestants performed, Maya started to feel something she hadn't expected. Instead of feeling more intimidated, she was feeling more confident. These students were skilled, no doubt about it. But they were playing the music like they were afraid to make a mistake. Like they were more worried about being perfect than about sharing something beautiful with the world. During the intermission, people started getting up to stretch their legs and chat. Maya stayed in her seat, not wanting to draw attention to herself. But as she watched the groups of people talking, she noticed something that made her heart race a little. There, in the lobby, just outside the auditorium doors, was a piano. Not the grand piano on the stage, but a smaller upright piano that looked like it was used for practice or warm-ups. It was sitting there all alone, with no one paying attention to it. Maya looked around. Most people were focused on their conversations. The contestants were probably in their practice rooms getting ready for the second half of the competition. No one was watching the lonely piano in the lobby. Almost without thinking, Maya got up from her seat and walked toward the lobby. Her heart was beating fast again, but this time it wasn't from nerves. It was from excitement. From the sudden realization that maybe this day didn't have to be a complete waste after all, she approached the piano slowly, looking around to make sure no one was paying attention to her. The bench was empty, and the piano lid was open, revealing keys that looked well-maintained and loved. Maya sat down and placed her hands on the keys. They felt perfect under her fingers, not too heavy, not too light, with just the right amount of resistance. She pressed one key gently, then another. The sound was clear and warm, so different from her old keyboard at home. Maya looked around one more time. People were still chatting in their small groups, focused on their own conversations. The contestants were nowhere to be seen. It was just her and this beautiful instrument. Sitting in this grand lobby, like they were meant to find each other, she placed both hands on the keyboard and began to play. Very softly at first, the opening notes of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. The first few notes that came from Maya's fingers were so soft, they almost disappeared into the background noise of the lobby. She was playing for herself, the way she always did at home when the world felt too heavy in music. It was the only thing that could lift the weight from her shoulders. Her eyes were closed, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. The opening of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 begins like a whisper, someone telling you a secret they've been keeping for years. Maya's fingers found the melody easily, moving across the keys like they had been born to be there. This was her piece, the one she had lived with for months, the one that had gotten her through some of the hardest times in her life. As she played, something magical started to happen. The music began to grow, not just in volume, but in emotion. Maya wasn't thinking about technique or competition rules or what anyone else might think. She was just letting the music flow through her the way it always did, raw and honest and completely real. The conversations in the lobby continued around her, but slowly, something began to change. A woman who had been talking to her friend about the weather stopped mid-sentence, her head turning toward the sound of the piano. A man checking his phone looked up, his eyes searching for where the music was coming from. Maya was completely lost in the piece now. She had reached the part where the melody begins to build, where Rachmaninoff takes you on a journey from gentle sadness to powerful emotion. Her hands moved with confidence across the keys, her body swaying slightly with the rhythm. This wasn't the careful, precise playing she had heard from the contestants on stage. This was music that came from somewhere deep inside, music that had been shaped by real life and real feelings. A teenage girl who had been sitting with her parents stood up and moved closer to the piano. She was one of the contestants, still wearing her performance dress, but the competitive look in her eyes had been replaced by something else entirely. Wonder reggae, or recognition of something she had been missing in her own playing. The music continued to grow, and so did the audience. People were no longer pretending to have conversations while listening with half an ear. They were openly watching now, some of them moving closer to get a better view of the girl at the piano, who was playing like her life depended on it. Maya's interpretation of the piece was unlike anything most of them had ever heard. It's where the official contestants had played it with technical precision. Maya played it with her heart. When she reached the section that reminded her of her grandmother, her touch became gentle and warm, like a lullaby. When she got to the parts that sounded like struggle and triumph, her whole body seemed to pour into the music, her fingers attacking the keys with passionate intensity. An elderly man in an expensive suit, one of the judges. Based on the official badge hanging around his neck, stopped walking and stood perfectly still, listening. His eyes were wide with surprise. He had been judging piano competitions for 20 years, and he thought he had heard everything. But this girl was playing like she had discovered something in the music that no one else had found before. More. People were gathering now. Parents who had been checking their phones were putting them away and moving closer. Other contestants were emerging from their practice rooms, drawn by the sound. Even some of the concert hall staff had stopped their work to listen. Maya was completely unaware of her growing audience. She had reached the most challenging part of the piece, the section that had taken her months to master on her broken keyboard at home. Her fingers flew across the keys with incredible speed and precision, but more importantly with incredible feeling. Every note seemed to tell a story. Every phrase seemed to carry the weight of her dreams and struggles. Mother, who had been talking to another parent about their children's chances in the competition, found herself wiping away tears. She couldn't understand why this music was affecting her so strongly. But something about the way this girl played made her think about her own dreams. The ones she had given up years ago. The lobby was getting quieter now, except for the sound of the piano. Conversations had stopped completely. People were standing in small groups, all facing the same direction, all listening to the same incredible performance. Some were recording on their phones, not for social media, but because they knew they were witnessing something special and wanted to remember it. Maya's playing had reached a crescendo. The part of the piece where all the emotions come together. In one powerful moment, her hands were moving with incredible speed and strength, but also with perfect control. She had practiced this section so many times that her fingers knew exactly where to go. Even when her mind was completely focused on the feeling behind the music, a young contestant who had performed earlier in the competition stood near the back of the crowd, watching Maya with a mixture of amazement and envy. He had played the same piece just an hour ago, and he had been proud of his performance. But listening to Maya now, he realized that he had been playing the notes without really understanding the music. He had been so focused on not making mistakes that he had forgotten to feel anything. The crowd was growing larger by the minute. People were coming out of the auditorium during the intermission, and instead of chatting about the performances they had just heard, they were being drawn to this unexpected concert in the lobby. Some were standing, some were sitting on the edges of chairs and benches, all of them completely captivated by what they were hearing. Maya's performance was building toward the climax of the piece, the moment where Rachmaninoff brings all the themes together in one overwhelming surge of emotion. Her whole body was involved now, her shoulders lifting and falling with the music, her head moving with the rhythm, her feet working the pedals with perfect timing. The sound filled the entire lobby, reaching every corner and drawing every person into its spell. This wasn't just a piano recital anymore. This was something much more personal and powerful. It was one person's soul being shared with the world through music, and everyone who heard it could feel that honesty and passion. A security guard who had been making his rounds stopped and stood perfectly still, his radio crackling with ignored messages. He had worked at this concert hall for 10 years and had heard thousands of performances, but he had never heard anything like this. The girl at the piano wasn't just playing music, she was creating magic. The piece was nearing its end now, and Maya's playing began to soften, bringing the audience back down from the emotional heights where she had taken them. But the lobby remained completely silent, except for the music. No one wanted to break the spell. No one wanted this moment to end, as Maya played the final gentle notes of the piece. The same notes she had started with, but somehow completely transformed by the journey they had all taken together. The silence in the lobby was complete. Even the background noise of the building seemed to have stopped, as if the entire world was holding its breath. Maya's hands lifted from the keys, and for a moment that seemed to last forever, there was absolute silence. Then, like a dam breaking, the applause began. It started with one person, then two. And suddenly, the entire lobby was erupting in the most enthusiastic applause any of them had ever heard in that building. The applause seemed to go on forever. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting on the keys, completely shocked by what was happening around her. She had played that piece hundreds of times in her tiny apartment, but she had never experienced anything like this. People were clapping so hard their hands must have hurt. Some were even standing up, which she knew was called a standing ovation, something she had only seen in movies. Her cheeks were flushed red, partly from the physical effort of playing such a demanding piece, but mostly from the overwhelming realization that all these people, important people, fancy people, people who knew about music, had actually enjoyed listening to her play. The girl who wasn't good enough to even audition for the competition had just given a performance that had stopped an entire lobby, full of people in their tracks. But as the applause continued, Maya suddenly remembered where she was and what had happened earlier. Her stomach dropped as she realized that Director Blackwell might be somewhere in this crowd watching her. She looked around nervously, trying to spot him among the faces of the people who were still clapping and smiling at her. She didn't have to look for long. Director Blackwell emerged from the crowd like a storm cloud moving across a sunny sky. His face was red, and not in the good way that Maya's was. He looked angry and embarrassed, and Maya could tell by the way he was walking toward her that she was in serious trouble. The applause started to die down as people noticed the director approaching. The happy, celebratory mood in the lobby began to shift into something more tense. Everyone could sense that something dramatic was about to happen. "What exactly do you think you're doing?" Director Blackwell's voice cut through the remaining claps like a knife. The lobby fell completely silent. All those people who had just been cheering for Maya were now watching to see what would happen next. Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs feeling shaky again. I was just playing. I didn't think anyone would mind. Didn't think anyone would mind? Director Blackwell's voice was getting louder. "You were told that you were not qualified to participate in this competition. You were told to leave. Instead, you decide to create this circus in our lobby." Some people in the crowd started to look uncomfortable. They'd just witnessed something beautiful, and now they were watching a young girl get yelled at for sharing her talent. A few people were starting to murmur to each other, and Maya could tell that not everyone agreed with what the director was saying. "Sir, she was incredible," said a voice from the crowd. It was the elderly judge who had stopped to listen earlier. "I've been judging piano competitions for 20 years, and that was one of the most moving performances I've ever heard." Director Blackwell turned to face the judge, his expression getting even more stern. "Professor Williams, with all due respect, this is not about the quality of the performance. This is about rules and standards. You cannot have random people disrupting our events." "Random people?" Another voice joined in. This time it was a woman who looked like she might be a music teacher. "That girl just played Rachmaninoff's piano concerto. No, 2 from memory. With more feeling and passion than most professional pianists I know." "How is she random?" Maya watched this conversation happening above her head, feeling like she was in the middle of a tug-of-war game where she was the rope. Part of her wanted to just apologize and leave, to avoid causing any more trouble. But another part of her was starting to feel angry again. These people had enjoyed her music. They had been moved by it. Why was that such a bad thing? More people were starting to speak up now. Parents were talking to each other in low voices, and Maya could hear snippets of their conversations. "That was better than anything we heard." "On stage, why isn't she in the competition? This seems unfair." A man with a phone in his hand stepped forward. "I recorded that performance and posted it online. It's already been shared 50 times in the last 5 minutes. He looked directly at Director Blackwell. "People are asking why this talented girl was rejected from the competition." Director Blackwell's face went from red to white. Maya could see the moment he realized that this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about his reputation, his competition, and his decision-making. In the age of social media, news traveled fast, and not all news was good news. "That's irrelevant," he said, but his voice wasn't as confident as it had been before. "The rules are clear. Contestants must meet certain qualifications." "What qualifications?" asked Professor Williams, stepping closer. "Talent. She clearly has that. Dedication. She obviously knows the piece inside and out. Passion. We all just witnessed that. What exactly is she missing?" Director Blackwell looked around the lobby, realizing that he was surrounded by people who were no longer on his side. These weren't random troublemakers. These were parents, teachers, judges, music lovers who had just experienced something special and couldn't understand why it was being dismissed. "She doesn't have the proper educational background," he said finally. "She's from a public school. She's self-taught. This competition is for students who have had serious musical training. And who decides what counts as serious training?" The question came from one of the contestants, a girl who had performed earlier in the day. "I've been taking lessons since I was 5, and I've never played anything that beautiful. Maybe there's more than one way to learn music." Maya couldn't believe what she was hearing. These people, strangers who didn't know anything about her, were standing up for her. They were arguing with the powerful director of the competition because they believed in her music. Director Blackwell was clearly getting more frustrated. "This is not a democracy. I make the decisions about who qualifies for this competition, and my decision stands." "Then maybe your decisions need to be reconsidered," said another parent. "My daughter has been taking expensive lessons for 8 years, and she's never played with half the emotion we just heard from this girl." The crowd was getting bigger now. People from inside the auditorium had heard the commotion and were coming out to see what was happening. Contest participants, their families, and even more judges were gathering around Maya and the director. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Let her compete." Suddenly other people were joining in. "Give her a chance. This isn't fair. She deserves to be heard." Maya stood in the middle of it all, hardly believing what was happening. An hour ago, she had been sitting alone in a corner, feeling like the smallest person in the world. Now, she was surrounded by people who were fighting for her right to share. Her music director Blackwell looked around at the crowd, his face showing a mixture of anger, embarrassment, and something that might have been panic. This was not how these events were supposed to go. Competitions were supposed to be orderly, predictable, controlled. This felt like chaos, but it was chaos with a purpose. Everyone in that lobby had heard something special, something that reminded them why they loved music in the first place, and they weren't willing to let it be dismissed just because it didn't come in the right package. The director pulled out his phone and stepped away from the crowd, probably to call someone for advice or help. Maya watched him go, her heart pounding, with a mixture of hope and fear. She had no idea what would happen next, but she knew that whatever it was, her life had just changed forever. Director Blackwell stood in the corner of the lobby, his phone pressed against his ear, speaking in urgent whispers to someone on the other end. Maya could see him gesturing with his free hand, his face getting redder by the minute. She couldn't hear what he was saying, but she could tell from his body language that the conversation wasn't going well for him. Meanwhile, the crowd around Maya hadn't dispersed. If anything, it was getting bigger. People were no longer just talking about her performance, they were actively discussing what should happen next. Parents were sharing stories about their own children's musical journeys, and many were admitting that they had never heard their kids play with the kind of passion Maya had just shown. A woman approached Maya with a warm smile. "Honey, that was absolutely beautiful. My daughter has been studying piano for 10 years, and I hope someday she can play with half the feeling you just showed us." "Thank you," Maya said quietly, still not quite believing this was all real. "Don't thank me," the woman said. "Thank yourself for having the courage to play. A lot of people have talent, but not everyone has the bravery to share it the way you just did." Professor Williams, the elderly judge who had first spoken up for Maya, was now having an animated conversation with several other official-looking people. Maya caught pieces of their discussion. "Extraordinary talent, most moving performance of the day, and we need to reconsider our policies." One of the contestants, a boy who had performed earlier, walked up to Maya. "I heard you play. The same piece I did, but yours was completely different. How did you learn to make it sound so alive?" Maya thought about his question. "Guess I just tried to feel what the music was saying. Well, like when Rachmaninoff wrote those notes, he was trying to tell us something about his life, about being happy and sad and everything in between. I tried to understand what he was feeling and then share that with people." The boy nodded slowly. "I've been so focused on playing every note perfectly that I forgot music is supposed to make people feel something. My teacher always tells me about technique and timing, but no one ever talks about what the music means." This conversation was happening all around the lobby now. The performance had sparked something in people, making them think about what music really was and why it mattered. Parents were questioning whether their children's expensive lessons were actually helping them become better musicians, or just better at following rules. Director Blackwell finished his phone call and walked back toward the crowd. His expression was different now, not angry, but something closer to resigned. He looked tired, like he had just fought a battle, and wasn't sure if he had won or lost. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice cutting through the conversations. The lobby fell quiet again, everyone turning to hear what he would say next. "I have just spoken with the board of directors for this competition," he began, and Maya's heart started beating faster. "They have made me aware that several videos of Miss Chen's performance have already been posted online and are gaining significant attention." Maya's eyes widened. She hadn't even thought about people recording her. But now she realized that dozens of phones had been pointed in her direction during her performance. "Furthermore," Director Blackwell continued, "I have been reminded that the mission of this competition is to celebrate and nurture musical talent wherever it may be found." He paused, looking directly at Maya. "It appears that we may have overlooked ... a significant talent today." The crowd was hanging on every word now. Maya felt like the entire world had stopped moving, waiting to hear what would happen next. "Therefore," the director said, his voice getting stronger, "I am announcing that Miss Chen will be given a special performance slot in tonight's final round. She will perform on the main stage and will be judged alongside our other finalists." Lobby exploded. People were cheering, clapping, and some were even crying with joy. Maya felt like her legs might give out from under her. After being told she wasn't good enough to even audition, she was now being invited to perform on the biggest stage of her life. But Director Blackwell wasn't finished. "Also want to announce that, moving forward, this competition will be revising its entry requirements to focus more on talent and passion and less on educational background and formal training credentials." This announcement brought even more applause. Maya realized that her rejected audition had accidentally started something much bigger than just her own dream. It had made people question the whole system of how young musicians were evaluated and supported. As the crowd began to disperse, people going back to their seats for the evening performances, Maya found herself surrounded by well-wishers contest. Participants were shaking her hand and wishing her luck. Parents were telling her how inspired they were by her courage. Even some of the judges were stopping to chat with her about her musical background and her plans for the future. Professor Williams approached her with a business card. "Maya, I teach at the conservatory downtown. If you're interested in more formal training to complement your natural talent, I would be honored to work with you. And I want to be clear, you don't need formal training to be a great musician. But it might help you explore even more of your potential." Maya took the card with shaking hands. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything yet," he smiled. "See how you do tonight first. Though if that lobby performance was any indication, I think you're going to do just fine." As the time for the evening performance approached, Maya felt a different kind of nervousness than she had that morning. This wasn't the fear of being rejected or not being good enough. This was the excitement of knowing she was about to share her music with an even bigger audience. People who were now expecting something special from her when her name was called and she walked onto the main stage. The auditorium erupted in applause before she had even played a single note. Word of her lobby performance had spread throughout the building, and everyone wanted to hear what all the fuss was about. Maya sat at the magnificent grand piano she had admired from the back row earlier that day. The stage lights were warm on. Her face and the audience stretched out before her like a sea of expectant faces. For a moment, she thought about her mother, who was probably just getting home from her shift at the diner, not knowing that her daughter's entire life was about to change. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play the same piece she had performed in the lobby, but somehow it felt completely different on this stage. The sound was richer, fuller, and it filled every corner of the auditorium. But more importantly, Maya felt different. She wasn't playing as the rejected girl who wasn't good enough anymore. She was playing as someone who belonged here, someone who had something important to share with the world. Her performance that night was even more powerful than her lobby concert. The audience was completely silent throughout, hanging on every note, and when she finished, The standing ovation lasted for several minutes. People were openly crying, moved by the pure emotion and authenticity of her playing. When the winners were announced later that evening, Maya's name was called first. She had not only won the competition, but she had done it in a way that changed how everyone in that room thought about music and talent, and what really mattered in a performance. But perhaps more importantly, the videos of her lobby performance had indeed gone viral. By the end of the week, millions of people around the world had watched the girl who was told she wasn't good enough play her heart out in a fancy concert hall lobby. Her story sparked conversations about accessibility in the arts, about the difference between technical skill and musical soul, about the importance of giving everyone a chance to share their gifts with the world. Maya's victory became more than just a personal triumph. It became a symbol of hope for every young person who had ever been told they weren't the right fit, who didn't come from the right background, or who learned in a different way than everyone else. Her story proved that talent and passion can come from anywhere, and that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places.